morning and welcome to the morning program, the Dailies on Echo Television International. And you know, it's a world of politics, especially the rivalry, especially in the PDP, where we have Wike. He has actually withdrawn from the PDP campaign, and he hopes to have some talking to the press tomorrow. That is Friday, so we'll keep our fingers crossed to see what is it that Wike have together with other people that are supporting him. And I'm Sarah Elisha Dasham, and Rachel Tanzi is here with me. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, Sarah.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Okay, before we go to the first paper this morning, we're live on Facebook and also YouTube. Do well to drop your comment there and we'll read it real time. Let's go to the first paper.
On the first news, IHRC to federal government discuss with IPOP, Yoruba agitators and bandits. Peter Obi shares UNN certificate online for public view. Judases abound in Buhari's government, says Governor Yahaya Bello. And the big story, Atiku calls Wike allies bluff, says nobody can sack Ayu. As river governors' allies pull out of Atiku's campaign council. Senate screens confirms Ariora as CGN. Industrial court order ASU to end strike. Union filed on to appeal resumption order. Court ruling shameful. Nans ERC kick. Asks Labour to declare nationwide strike. SAC CSO hires robbers to rob Ogun Company. IHRC to federal government discuss with IPO, Yoruba agitators and bandits. And still on the first news is on International Day of Peace. Shun discrimination, crime, pirate, confraternity urges Nigerians. And on the downside of the paper, on the United Nations General Assembly, Buhari vows commitment to free, fair, and credible election. Still on the PDP crisis, Wike merits commendation, fighting a national cause. This is coming from APC chieftain. Your role in Nigeria's democracy indelible, Obasa tells Remi Tinubu at 62. And that's all the news on First News.
All right, let's take a look at the leadership newspaper. And as to strike, court can't force lecturers to work, says students, which you can find on page 7. Bagudu employers the news speak on his death. You can read more of that too on the leadership newspaper. We have PDP Board of Trustee intervenes as Wike camp pulls out of the Atiku campaign council. In final outing at the United Nations General Meeting, President Muhammadu Buhari seeks death pardon for Nigeria, pledges credible elections in 2023. The writer following that wants reform of the UN agency and says Ukraine war making it difficult to tackle plenary issues, where I hope that we stop, blaming certain issues, certain war, whether it's the Ukraine, Russia, whatever, for the reason why certain things are not working in our own country. I mean, other countries are striving despite the war going on between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, Angola, that is just our sister over here, or would I say our brother over here. You were surprised that their currency has actually shot up to what it was formerly, and you begin to wonder what did they do differently despite the war going on between Russia and hoping that the nations will keep, forgiving us, or they will pardon us for that. Regardless of whether we're going to have a credible election or not, I believe that it is the responsibility of the leadership of Nigeria as a whole to put their hands together, and we can see how we can make the election credible, and also what can we do to invest more. We have lots of things that we need to invest into, and I keep saying it and I keep repeating it. All we have to do is look around us and see what more have we not do. Which other sector should we tap from rather than just the oil? So rather than blaming the reason why Russia, Ukraine are having, I mean, then when they started the war, we're excited that that will, boost us, especially being one of the oil producing countries. But reverse is the case right now. So I hope we'll look into that and not just keep relying on borrowing. Still on the leadership newspaper, epidemic looms as flood unearthed 200 corpses in Niger State. It's really a sad one. And on Supreme Court, short of 8 justices. This is coming from the Chief Justice of Nigeria. And we have the picture story here where we can see the president during the United Nations Assembly in US yesterday. And we have a tweet space, NDLEA and others want drug war intensified, and this is really a good one coming from the NDLEA. And that's all on the leadership newspaper.
On the This Day newspaper, Senate, PIA won't solve oil industry challenges without addressing crude oil. And the story on the right there, military security personnel involved in the economic sabotage. Penkasan and UPRC allege $47 million Paris Club refund. Court sets aside consent judgment favoring firm. You can read more of that story on page 6. Russian warns West, raises spectra of nuclear conflict. You can read that story on page 10. Still on the PDP crisis, deepens as Wike loyalists put out of Atiku's campaign. And more on the riders, presidential candidate sues for peace, seeks collaboration, declares decision to resign is Ayu's. Unbothered chairman says party ideas development driven. And the big story on this day, in last address to UNGA, Buhari recommits to credible 2023 poll, says Nigeria championing democracy, rule of law in West Africa. Reiterates adherence to constitutional term limit. Canvasses debt cancellation for developing nations, call for structural change in the United Nations. Federal government asks ASU to obey court order, resume work. You can read more of that story on page 4. And there's a picture story where Buhari's last address to the United Nations General Assembly as Nigeria's president.
All right, let's take a look at the Vanguard newspaper. We have Umon's mother. We have court remands Chinese national Greek in prison, with that found on page 6. And on the World Peace Day, nobody can eliminate any religion in Nigeria. This is coming from the Sultan. You can read more of that on page 33. Autumn begs UN to pay attention to the humanitarian crisis in the Benue North Central. Government businesses lose 10.5 trillion naira to corruption and inefficiency in ports. You can read up more of that business story on page 19. The big story says why court order ASU to call off the 7-month-long strike. And these are some of it. ASU to appeal court order on resumption today. It is a win-win situation. This is coming from NAS. Everybody is tired of the strike. This is coming from the parents. And federal government declared no victory, no vanquish. No, to order the VC to reopen varsity adds it within ASU's right to appeal. You can read all of that story on page 7. And we have a leaked memo that says no crisis among Supreme Court justice. This is coming from the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Saboteurs in Buhari's government, says Kogi Governor Yahaya Bello. And on 2023, government won't fund political parties. This is coming from Gibaja. And on the PDP crisis, I can't force IU to resign, Atiku insists. We're out of your campaign council unless IU quit. That's coming from Wike. And Bode George Jang, Ghana, Makinde, Dankuma, and the Southwest Group backs Wike. Downside of the paper, we have Obi's manifesto to be released before campaign. This is coming from Utomi. And banditry, kidnapping are expansion of the Boko Haram activities, coming from the ex-governor Gucci. And Buhari at the United Nations General Assembly seek debt cancellation. You can read up that on page 8, and that's all on the Vanguard newspaper.
On the Daily Trust, ASU rejects court order for resumption, vows to appeal ruling. I'm leaving legacy of credible election in Nigeria. You can read more of that story on page 6. Sele, this is sad coming from our president. Like, how would you say I'm leaving a legacy of credible election in Nigeria, of all the things to brag of? it's very embarrassing that this is coming from our president. Is credible election a legacy for you to talk about, or is it something that is actually expected? Shouldn't it be normal that there should be credible election in Nigeria? And this is a United Nations Council, for Christ's sake, where we have other world leaders, and you're hearing you say, I am leaving a legacy of credible election. Don't you think it's making us a joke in the eye of these people when they will probably come up and talk about world-moving things? You're telling us you're leaving a legacy of credible election.
Things that we discussed over there. Remember that we are also and we are the host of this meeting that I'll be holding over there. So this is just one out of the many. But then, as of course, it is expected that for every democratic nation, a credible election is expected. But that is reverses the case. We have people that left, right, and center. I mean, we still have the issue in Mali and the rest of it, where still back and forth coup is coming on. So I believe it will really be a legacy for you as a leader to always have credible elections in your country. But then I think my bone of contention over here is the fact that we shouldn't blame other nations for the reason why we are not doing well in our own country. I believe we should know what we can do. We should not keep doing things the normal way. If you see we've been doing it the normal way, we see that they are not bringing us results, then it's time we go back to the drawing board and say, what more can we do outside this that can actually make us that nation, that other nation we want to come into? I mean, people should come invest in Nigeria. People should come to school in Nigeria. People should come to our hospitals in Nigeria. Let it not be that we are always going out and we are enriching other nations and making our own nation poor. So I think that should be the bone of contention. That should be what the discussion should be around such you get. But then definitely if there's credible election, every other thing will fall in place. So I believe that is the right way forward.
All right. I'm still on Daily Trust. Atiku to Wike's camp. Retrace your step. We won't participate in campaign order IA. This is coming from Rivers Governor's camp. Solution coming. And then crisis will benefit APC and others. This is coming from an analyst, and there's a picture story, and if you want to know what that is all about, you can get the Daily Trust. And then coming from forex scarcity, banks suspend international transaction on Naira debit card. More of that story on page 19. And at the downside of the paper, flood destroys 14,496 farmlands in 5 Kano local governments. And this is coming from NEMA. You can read more of that story on page 5. Ariwola confirms CG and says Supreme Court short of 8 justices. You can read more of that story on page 2. 29 die at Edo record 225 Lassa fever cases. You can read more of that story on page 5. And that's all the news on Daily Trust.
All right, on the Daily Sun newspaper, the first story is on erosion. Soludo cries to the federal government, says 40% of Anambra landmass under threat. That can be found on page 25. Kanu hails Uwayi as peaceful leader. War without end in PDP. That's a big story on the Daily Sun newspaper. Wiki group pulls out of Atiku campaign. I can't force IU to resign, says presidential candidate. Waraba Peace Committee, Miss Autumn, pledges quick resolution of free. You can read all of that on page 6. Buhari at the United Nations General Assembly restates commitment to fair and free elections. Airline lose billions at Lagos Airport, record 93 bird strike in 6 months. Nigeria too advanced for same-faith presidency. This is coming from the Apostolic Church. And the Uber offers to pay 1 million naira monthly to defer Auto Easy 50 million naira loan. Buhari begs for debt cancellation for several challenged countries. And we have another story here. ASU vows to appeal as court orders lecturers back to classroom. NAS threatening to disrupt political campaign if impasse is not resolved. And I hope that that will be resolved regardless of what the outcome is, what have been said about the lecturer should go back and
Yeah.
open the classrooms. We are having NAS here, they would threaten to, disrupt political campaigns. We should know campaigns are just by the corner. People are already preparing all they need to do. So I just hope that all this will be resolved. Just like I said, it is normal that in any democratic nation, elections to be credible. But then in a situation where there's a lot of unrest, definitely people will want to do one or two things to temper with that peace. So I hope that we will actually have an eagle eye on this, see what we can do to address all these issues. Picture story, we can see President Muhammadu Buhari, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos, Bello Matawalle of Zamfara, Babagana Zulum of Borno, and we have Abdul Razak of Kwara. Back we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Godfrey Oyima. We have Mohammed Badir in the middle. We have Governor Simon Lalong of Plateau State during the PDP Buhari's address at the 77 United Nations General Assembly in New York yesterday. And I hope with all that is done, with all the ideas they have gathered there, since it's not just the president that is there, we have ministers and governors that are there. They'll be able to get more insight from other leaders when they get back to their own respective state. Then they will apply it so that we'll actually have a country that we all crave for. Downside of the paper, the newly confirmed Chief Justice of Nigeria denies crisis in the Supreme Court. That can be found on page 27, and that's all on the Daily Sun newspaper.
On the Daily Times, still on PDP crisis, article says party will move on with campaign as Wike allies pull out. Reiterates Ayu's removal must follow PDP constitutional provisions, says Wike's camps refuse to make nomination into campaign council. And the big story, still on ASU strike, NAM's kick against court judgment. And the story on the writer says court cannot force members of ASU back to lecture theaters. Judge cites national interest for order. Remit case filed to CJ for reassignment. ASU rejects court order, vows to appeal. Federal government hails judgment, says no victor, no vanquish. And on the left side of the paper, on the oil and gas sector, HOR demands details of joint venture contract from 1990. You can read more of that through on page 5. Senate confirms Justice Ariola as the Chief Justice of Nigeria. You can read more of that story on page 5. Oil theft is big business. Hold military responsible. This is coming from Pengasan, and you can read more of that story on page 5. And there's a picture story where we can see the Vice President, Yemi Osibajo, and on the downside of the paper, Buhari restates adherence to constitutional terms limit, says Nigeria promoting democracy, rule of law in West Africa. More of that story on page 2. Court sets aside consent judgment on $47 million Paris Club refund payment. You can read more of that story on page 5, and that's all the news on the Daily Times.
On the Nation newspaper, 95.4 million liters crude oil stolen daily, says the government. Nigeria, US, Germany, and others seal part on food security. It's found on page 8. Senate confirms Ariwola as the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Dignitaries greet Remi Tinubu at 62. We have the PDP quakes at Wike Group up out of the Atiku's campaign. Kamin says Ayu must quit. Chairman would be forced out, says Atiku. You can read all of that on the front page of the paper and continue the analysis on page 31. Buhari I will bequeath legacy of credible polls. Downside of the paper, court order won't stop negotiation with ASU, says Ngige. VCs to reopen varsity soon. Appeal not ruled out, says the lecturers. Downside of the paper, we have two stories which you can find on page 27 and also on page 8. So you can do well to get the Nation newspaper, read any of the stories that is of interest to you.
On the Punch newspaper, Pengasan fingered military in 600,000 barrel daily stolen crude. You can read more of that story on page 18. Still on ASU strike, ASU to appeal ruling, parents want strike ended. More of that story on page 16. Senate confirms Ariola, new CGN gets agenda. Court sets aside $47 million Paris Club payment judgment. And the big story on the Punch, IU must go. PDP calls emergency meeting over governors, others gang up. You can see more of that story on page 2. And the writer says, as Wike Makinde Fayose, George Ghana, order pull out of presidential campaign. Southern PDP bloc says Atiku failed to honor London agreement with Rivers governor's camp. I cannot decide IU's fate. Ex-Vice President replies aggrieved campaign council members. And still on the Punch newspaper, Buhari promises credible polls, seeks debt forgiveness. And on the downside of the paper, fraudsters hack bank, transfer 522 million naira to 225 accounts. More of that story on pages 4 and 5. No post-conviction bail for Baba Ijesha, court rules. More of that story on page 12. Hoodlums raid Ogun communities, kill 3, police investigate. More of that story on pages 4 and 5. And that's all the news on the Punch newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, Supreme Court Justice didn't write petition against Tanko. Ariwola clarifies. Fresh trouble for Ekweremadu as Enugu lawyers seek declaration of seat vacates. Denying Kanu access to treatment is plot to kill him, says the group. And bank tinker with forex sale templates seek new operating rules. On the 2023 Wike Camp reopens PDP won't snub Atiku's campaign. And the writer Atiku is saying, I can't force IU to resign, but they just retaliate position on the Southern chairmanship. Crisis will soon be over, Board of Trustee Chairman assures. And Oyo PDP Southwest Forum back Wike and Makinde. Wike demands Noble, says APC chief tired. And after maintaining a studied silence since last week when the unveiled its presidential campaign committee for 2023 election that included the Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike, the governor's camp yesterday withdrew from the committee, reciting a fresh episode in the crisis that had gripped the opposition party since it concluded its presidential primary in May. You can read all of that on the front page and more on page 6. ASU Fourth Court ruling proceed on appeal as lawyers seek compliance. Bandit kill 5, kidnap 8 in Niger, with detail found on page 29. That's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On Nigeria News Direct, confusion as court orders ASU to end 7-month strike. Governor Atom debunks report his son murdered someone in the UK. You can read more of that story on page 5. NGX provides efficient market to enhance security lending. And the big story, IU Atiku Pari. PDP crisis worsen as Wike's camp pulls out of Atiku's campaign council. More of that story on page 3. Climate change meeting. Buhari reiterates Nigeria's strong commitment to energy transition plan. More of that story on page 5. Olusegun Aina, BUVAS ND, bag Uni Osun Honorary Doctor of Business Administration degree. You can read more of that story on page 2. There's a cement promo. Regulators allow Dangote for giving 1 billion naira to customers. More of that story on page 3. Nigeria needs more gas power plants to meet country's energy demand. This is coming from NBET, and that's all the news on News Direct.
All right, let's continue with the Business Day newspaper. 35% of dollar millionaires lose status under Buhari's regime. In the last 7 years, we have about 5,000 Nigerians living in the country fell from the ranking of the high worth individuals, as there is no longer having up to 1 million to liquid asset. An analysis of African private wealth data has received. You can read all of that on the front page and also page 30. Soft drink producers raise price to cope with the 10 naira litre tax. Half-year petrol imports soared 71 amid smuggling. And we have businesses, commuter suffers as Lagos traffic worsen. All of that can be found on page 2. We have a picture story here. You can do well to get the Business Day newspaper and read any of the stories that is of interest to you.
On the Matrix, court refuses Baba Ijesha's bail application pending appeal. Gun no longer threat to democracy, but fake news. This is coming from Goodluck Jonathan, the former president of the country. Soludo brands Anambra as Nigeria's erosion capital, solicits for intervention. Senate confirms Olukayode Ariola appointment as CGN. And the big story on the 2000 PDPs on ending crisis. Wike Atiku others refuses to shed swords. How crisis may affect party's performance at the poll. And on the right side of the paper, this cause generates 393.2 billion naira revenue in 2022 in the first quarter and the second quarter. ASU to appeal court order directing lecturers to call off strike. Vajabiamila reveals why federal government should not fund political parties. And there's a picture story of the rumble in the PDP. Aggrieved Wike's group that pulled out of Atiku Presidential Campaign Council yesterday. And on the downside of the paper, Buhari addresses UNGA, canvasses debt cancellation. And if you want to read the full speech, you can get the Metrics newspaper.
All right, before we move further to other people, we'd like to take a time out where we can open the phone lines for our callers. They have quite a number of stories on our papers today. The speech coming from the President Muhammadu Buhari on the cancellation of Nigerians' debt and other African nations, and also Wike's camp pulling out of the Atiku's campaign. What did you feel about that story? And also the court has actually given ASU to open or order them to open the schools after the 7 months strike. So we really want to hear what you have to say about the story. Is it the right way forward for a country like Nigeria? Do not go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break. Thanks for staying tuned. It's still the Dailies on Network Television International. I'm Stella Elisha Dasham, and Rachel Tanzi is still here with me. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you, sir.
And before we end on the break, we're looking at quite a number of stories on our papers. The speech from the president on Nigeria, pardoning Nigeria from their debt, and also looking at the PDP crisis. We looked at that too on the paper, and also the order coming from the court for us to call off its 7-month strike. And we have actually been looking at quite a number of them. So you can actually call us. Our numbers are displayed on your screen. Let us hear what your views are, what your concerns are concerning any of the stories that is of interest to you. You can also drop your comment on our official Facebook page and YouTube. We'll do well to read it real time. Let's move further to Al Jazeera newspaper. Senate confirms Ariwola as the Chief Justice of Nigeria. PDP crisis, Wike's camp pull out of campaign. Insists IU must go. He will not resign, says Atiku and the Board of Trustees. So you can read more of that on Al Jazeera newspaper. Buhari appoint Demos DG of NTA. And reps discover NNPC secret accounts, where I hope it will be dig deeper. It's not just about discovering it, but we hope to hear more stories.
Exactly.
Because anytime we see stories like this, we begin to wonder what next, what are the moves. So if there's a secret account, we need to know the reason for the secret account, why do they have it, and what do they intend to do with the money that is in that secret account. We don't want to hear that a ministry like that keep going, and then it's after about 10 to 15 years we hear that, okay, there want to be an auditing. That's when we discover some people have actually stolen money left, right, and center. So I hope that with what reps have discovered, more will be done. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and bring you first-hand information on any of these things. No presidential candidate can match Tinubu. This is coming from the Tinubu group. 20 killed in fresh attack on Benue communities, and that is why the governor is seeking for the UN intervention, especially in the Benue North. NBA threatens suit against federal government over plan to ban pomo. Well, I hope we saw that on the paper, and we are seeing that NBA is threatening to sue against that. Well, I said that wasn't the first time we had that story. I think it was on Monday we saw it on the paper, so Tuesday. And I said the problem here is that it's always being preserved. Yeah. Some people use some chemicals that are very harmful and hazardous to the health to preserve this pomo. So if you can actually have it in your own way, buy it and make sure that you trust the buyer, then there will be no way we can be against that. But we hope that more will be done about that, because at the end of the day, it's for our own health, it's for our own good, and not to harm us in any way. Still on Nigerian newspaper, ASU kicks. I read a story. ASU kicks as court orders the end to strike. Why we didn't demand money to support Igbo presidency. This is coming from Ohanize. So you can read all of that story on page 9 of the Nigerian newspaper. And that's all on Nigerian newspaper.
On the New Telegraph, RFI, how successive government crippled investments in power sector. You can continue to read that story on page 3. NCAA alarmed as airlines record 93 bird strike incidents. More of that story on page 5. Senate confirms Ariola as substantive CGN. More of that story on page 3. Bajabiamila, why government won't fund parties. You can read more of that on page 4. Oil theft, hold military reliable, coming from Pengerson telling the Senate. You can read more of that story on page 2. And still on the presidency, why APC same faith ticket can't fly. This is coming from AZFA. You can read more of this story on page 5. And the big story on the New Telegraph is still on the PDP crisis. Atiku dares Wike, says IU won't resign, asks Rivers governor, orders to retrace steps. Wabara on fence, mending mission to Otom and Wike, treating people as if they have no value doesn't make sense. This is coming from Otom. Secondus distance self from case against PDP. Crisis punishment for breaching constitution. This is coming from Inkiri. And then Wike allies pull out of Atiku's campaign. You can read more of that story on pages 3, 4, 5, and 26. And on the right side of the paper, Buhari bids UNG a farewell, vows to entrench credible polls in 2023, promises support for rule of law in Africa. More of that on page 2. IPOP accuses Soludo of secretly killing their members. More of that on page 3. Still on 2023 election, play by the rule. British envoy tells politician. You can read that on page 5. And on the downside of the paper, still on ASU strike, ASU kicks as court orders lecturer to end strike. NANS reject court ruling, lecturers to appeal. No victor, no loser. This is coming from Indige. APC telling lecturers salary should be used to compensate students, and I'll say wow. And if you want to read more of that, you can see that story on page 2. 8 and 26. And on the downside of the paper, there's a study that ties Alzheimer's disease risks to newly found protein. This is an interesting one, and if you want to know more, you can read that on page 26, and that's all the news on New Telegraph.
On that New Telegraph, the story that caught my attention is that oil theft. Whole military liable, Pengasa tells Senate. And the writer following that story said 95.4 million liters stolen daily. Now, I think this is we really need to dig deeper into this, because let it not be a story that will just be swept under the carpet and then at the end of the day nothing is being done. No persecution of those who are involved in stealing the crude oil. And this is not the first paper, and that was why I felt we should talk a little about this, because I think it's high time, I always say that we hold people accountable and we need to be responsible as a nation.
Of course.
We're waiting for when finally we'll start having 100 million per barrel per day. Because we were looking at, especially with the issue of Russia, Ukraine, will be rubbing shoulders. But reverse is the case, we do not have that, because somebody somewhere are conniving with some highly placed people, stealing our crude oil, sending it to other parts of the country, or sending it outside the shores of Nigeria completely, enriching themselves while our Nigeria is still suffering. Now people get poor by the day. Take a look at the way people are living. If you take statistics of people that are living below $1 per day, you know that it's really a sad one. Not to talk about the issue of food crisis presently. We saw in one of our papers where some countries are trying to put their heads together to see how they'll be able to avert that. Nigeria has been part of that, been affected. We saw the number of states that have been affected by flood. Plateau State was involved in that. Many other states were being mentioned. In fact, some community had to vacate because of the flood. So have we sat down to ask ourselves, what would not happen to those people or to those communities that actually vacated? There'll be no crop, there'll be no food. And yet we keep treating this like with so much levity as if we do not care about this. I think this is a story that the federal government should take seriously. I knew the reps spoke about it, that those that are involved should be brought to book. But then we need to know what is the time frame that have been given to the security agency, because if you are saying that they are going to fight against their own, because it's the security agents that are being accused of, they are supposed to be the ones protecting these oil wells, but they are the ones stealing the crude oil again. Not to talk about the lives and property that have been destroyed. Talk about the land that most people cannot even farm, they cannot fish, nothing of that form. People of that community are being affected. We saw in our papers where they said maybe they want to stop amnesty, which we are just hoping that that do not happen. Okay, we have a caller. Hello, Joseph from Benue. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Joseph.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Please go on, we can hear you.
It's okay. I want to talk about, first of all, about the PDP. I will say kudos to the wicked. What is right. I'm not to step away and say, no, just understand and giving the opportunity to so that it will be good for the whole Nigeria. Number two, we have got to hear that the court. Within a few days, they can settle the issue about why many other countries are there.
Right, thank you so much, Joseph, for that contribution. And so, as I was saying, Richard, I hope and I believe that all this will be addressed. Exactly. Because with this, we'll actually tell the fate of Nigeria come 2023. So that whoever is coming, we know that he or she has a lot of work to do, and that they will be able to fix Nigeria, the oil sector. Pengasa won't have to complain about their oil being stolen, some of the workers not being paid, and all that is happening. So I hope we'll look into that.
And I want to believe that this has been an underlying issue. And everything is about taking opportunity to speak out. I'm wondering, why is it that it's now that Pengasan is hammering concerning this theft? We've said it doesn't look like something that just started yesterday.
No, they have. It has
been going on for years. Okay. And then secondly, there's no fact. This is not petty theft. We've made that very clear that this is a theft too big for us to think it's just some normal individual somewhere. So I don't think they are far from the truth if they keep hammering, look into the military, look into the government. Of course, even if they have the proof, this is sensitive, they might not come out to call names or point fingers, but I think when you're throwing something like this to the public.
Okay. Sorry, Rachel, for cutting you short. Hello, good morning. Okay, if we would love you to call us if you can before the end of the show. Yes, go on, Rachel.
And I think the reason why they are being loud about it now more than before is the fact that looking at the Russia and the Ukraine, and they are not still meeting target. While this is the period where we are to take advantage and we are not able to, and you wonder where's the problem. And now this is directly telling us, okay, that this is the problem. There's a theft going on. And that's why even at a time where we have the opportunity to do better and probably have a boom, we cannot deliver because this is the underlying problem. So I believe this is too serious for us to not keep emphasizing on it or to be silent about it or for it to be swept down the carpet. Like, it should be talked about until the government come out and say, okay, this is what we plan to do and this is the way forward. We know the problem. What's the solution?
Of course, of course. Thank you so much, Richard. Let's move to the Daily Independent newspaper. We have the 77 United Nations General Assembly. Buhari seek outright debt cancellation for developing countries. Vow to entrench process of free, fair, transparent, and credible elections. All of that can be found on Daily Independent. Nigerian Airlines suffer 93 bird strike in 6 months. This is coming from the NCAA. The big story, ASU moves to appeal order on returning to classes. Rivalry Union, Kuno urges the VCs to reopen varsities. Parents, students beg ASU to obey the court ruling. Will order VCs to reopen campuses if ASU regains. This is coming from the federal government. Oil prices surge as Putin mobilized more troops against Ukraine. Now we see it's getting more serious. Now we begin to wonder, what does Nigeria have to benefit or not benefit from this? You can read more of that on page 6. All right, our caller is back on the line again. Good morning. We can hear you, please, wherever you are. Move away from your TV set. Yeah, hello, we can hear you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Hello.
Please move away from your TV set. Okay. Well, if you can call us, we really appreciate. Still on Daily Independent newspaper, we have court set aside order asking governors to pay the $47 million to firm. And on the leak memo on the former Chief Justice of Nigeria, shock us, Ariwola, and the Senate confirms Ariwola as the Chief Justice of Nigeria. On insecurity, fan stops flight extension to airlines at Sunset Airport. PDP crisis, Atiku to Wike and allies, IU's resignation not in my hands. Shocked over withdrawal of Wike and allies from the campaign council. Wike associates have a strong point. This is coming from Wabara, PDP Board of Trustee Chairman. Downside of the paper, which is the last story I'll be taking, Access Holdings get CBN's note for payment service subsidiary. So you can read that on page 6, and that's all on the Daily Independent.
On the Business Standard, Ministry for aiding private hospitals to cut patient bill. And then the Prime Minister seeks intensified UN role in Rohingya repatriation. ADP cuts Bangladesh GDP growth forecast to 6.6%. And then Forex reserves drop below $37 billion. And that's all the news on the Business Standard.
You know, the Business Standard, this story is quite interesting. The ministry for aiding private hospitals to cut patients' bills. I mean, I'm really, really looking forward to when we will do the same thing here in Nigeria. Imagine going to the hospitals and then your bills are being cut. Apart from those that are having insurance, which still, the insurance still comes from your money because you are the one that actually registered. A certain percentage is being deducted. But we look forward to that you can actually access basic health care. Why? Because the ministry or the government have taken into cognizance that they need to take care of their citizens, and then your bill will be cut short. Well, I believe that will be done soon. Well, let's take a look at the Times Malta paper. And on the Times Malta, we have politicians told to avoid scourge of social climbing. That is an international paper. We have employees of Malta-based UN Asmun agency request investigation. And Abila's huge contingent to New York to cost 140,000 euro. You can read out of the story on the Times Malta. That's all on the Times Malta newspaper.
On the Punch Sport, Conte spies on Osimhen. United to revive strikers beat. More of that story on page 6. Maguire blames the year for struggle. More of that story on page 4. Full house, 24 Eagles battle ready for Algeria clash. Ferdinand in Nwaneri like Foden. More of that story on page 6. And then Sotil shocked as Italy snub Udogi. More of that story on page 5. Only Joshua can beat Fury. This is coming from Haye, and I am personally looking forward to this match because in as much as Joshua is one of us, I'm a Fury fan. So I don't know where to start. But then I'm looking forward to this match. Let's see who will win. Like, these are two good fighters. Like, we know that. Is Joshua taking the belt? Is Fury taking the belt? I don't know. Ronaldo, Qatar 2022 won't be my last. This is coming from Ronaldo, and you can read more of that story on page 3. This player is not ready to give up on football yet. And there's the big story. This is coming from Uwobi. Can he transfer Everton form to Eagles? Arsenal get Odegaard injury update. You can read more of that on page 5. Phoenix keeper Mandre out of Eagle tie. You can read more of that story on page 7, and that's all the news on Punch Sports.
Well, still on Sporting Sun, the world of sport, we have Super Eagles back ready for Algeria. Drills Eagles on ball possession. Guinea lands in Algeria, and this is coming from Pesiro. We have Man U to reignite Osimhen interest in January. Messi Barca contract talks leak. You can read all of that. We have Eagles Algeria clash not recognized by FIFA. Lille to wear the Ukrainian colors in Qatar. And we have retiring Fedri Ice fitting farewell Friday. We have other juicy stories from the Sporting Sun newspaper, so you can do well to grab any of the sporting papers for our sport lovers and read any of the stories that is of interest to you. And that's how far we can go on the program, The Dailies. Thank you so much to our viewers for keeping a date with us. Thank you so much, Rachel, for doing this with me. Thank you to all our crew members and also our supporters nationwide and even outside the shores of Nigeria. Thank you so much for always, supporting us with your prayers and also with all that is needed to keep us moving on air. Remember that if you feel tired, today is another day to start again because you are a winner. Have a blessed day.